Edwards, welcome back to Tuscaloosa, man. I hope you're doing well.
I am, Ryan, and unfortunately our show on Saturday, even though there's not an Alabama game, is being cut short due to, I believe it's the World Series. It actually wouldn't be the World Series because it's middle of the day. For some reason, we're only going for 3 hours, 11 to 2 Central. So,
hey, we'll take what we can.
Yeah,
we'll take what we can because
exactly. We'll show up, we'll do a show, and then we'll be back for the big one the following weekend for Baton Rouge.
Hey, Brad, going back to Alabama, Tennessee, just any takeaways from that game? Anything that you just kind of walked away watching Alabama, Tennessee, if you're able to absorb any of that?
Not really. I don't think there was anything that was all that surprising or concerning for that matter. I think that the biggest thing for Alabama is they seem to get out of it without any significant injuries, and not just the Tennessee game, but you think about how concerning the depth situation was at a number of positions for the season opener, given some of the injuries that took place in August. If people had told you that they would get to the LSU game with only the losses that they've had to this point, or only the people who won't be available to that game that they've had so far, I mean, I don't want to diminish the impact of any of the guys who have been hurt so far, but really outside of Diggs, I don't know that there's one that that has a huge impact on Alabama's chance to win the SEC, make the playoff, win the national championship, all that good stuff. And so I just think from the injury perspective, given how thin they were at certain positions coming into the season, the first 8 games went pretty well physically, and obviously on the field performance-wise went very, very well.
Brad, is this the best Alabama offense that you have seen in your lifetime?
I don't even know what I would compare it to. What would you put out? I mean, you probably have to go, back to the Bryant days, right? I mean, there's nothing else in the Saban era that would compare to it. I think 2012 was his previous best offense, and I mean, outside of that, there's nothing during my lifetime of following Alabama that I would even put in the conversation. Obviously, you get back further than that. I mean, you get back into the early 70s, and you're talking about a different sport, essentially, as far as the way that teams played offense. I just what team would you put up against it if you were even going to try to make an argument for another one?
Well, I think 2012, just because that offensive line, that offensive line kind of pushed around people. They did what they wanted to do, but it's so much different. I mean, and here's the scary part, Brad. I still think there's ways that this offense here in Tuscaloosa can continue to improve. I still think there's more to it.
Yeah, well, look, I do too, and I think everybody wants to see. I mean, even people who don't like Alabama, kind of in a sick way, want to see what they could actually do if they play their starters for 4 quarters. And so there's that that's still hanging out there. You mentioned the 2012 offense, and I was there for that game in Baton Rouge, and saw them really, really struggle offensively all the way up. I mean, the second half, they could do nothing offensively until that final drive when they absolutely had to. McCarron completed a few passes, and then obviously that screen to Yeldon that ended up deciding it. But I cannot imagine that happening to this year's offense, and we'll see. We'll see in less than 2 weeks. And I think that's what I'm so excited about with this game, is the opportunity to see not just this offense, but this team in as hostile of an environment as it can get. And let's just, be honest about it. For the rest of the season, this is the most difficult situation they'll have to play in. It might not be the best team they'll play. It'll be close to the best team, but it definitely, the environment will be the most difficult they'll have to face, because anything beyond this is either going to be in Tuscaloosa or it's going to be at a neutral site. So this is going to be, in some ways, the biggest test that they'll face all year, and I cannot wait to see what that offense does. I hate the first half, but you were mentioning the fact that we really haven't seen what this offense is completely capable of yet. the wrinkle that they introduced a few weeks ago with Jalen on the field along with Tua, that one really intrigues me. And I was expecting that we were going to see another couple of plays against Tennessee. But I think at the time when they normally have pulled that one out, the previous couple of games, Alabama was starting some drives deep in its own territory. And I figured that Saban just didn't want to do it there in that situation. And then the moment kind of passed by. So he's put some stuff out there for LSU and future opponents to look at and have to prepare for. But there's so many more things they could do with that they haven't shown yet. And I will be really surprised if we don't see, a couple more plays at least with both those guys out there together against LSU. And the possibilities are somewhat endless when you think about two, really dual threat quarterbacks. We don't think of Tua in that way, but we know he can run. Might not be quite the runner Jalen is, but when you got two dual threats out there, there are a lot of things that you can do from a play calling standpoint, the least of which is using Jalen as a decoy and possibly freeing up, some segment of the field where the defense is overcommitting to hurt.
Going back here, do you think Alabama's in the area now where they have to help somebody beat them? In other words, I believe LSU could play a 10 out of 10, but if Alabama doesn't give them some freebies, some turnovers, some ways to help them beat Alabama, I don't really see this as a game. Am I missing something here?
No, I agree with you, because I look at LSU, especially on offense, and I say, you know what, they're good at different position groups, but there's no single position group on that team that scares me. Like they're not what they were at receiver, obviously, when they had Odell Beckham and Jarvis Landry. They're not what they have been at running back when they had Fournette and Geist at the same time, and even some of the guys before them. I mean, they have often been elite at running back. Offensive line, they're decent. They've been banged up, and so they're very clearly not the best offensive line LSU's ever had. And while Joe Burrow is certainly more effective than some of the quarterbacks they've had in recent years, he's not a all SEC caliber guy. So there's nothing about the offense that really convinces me that they would have success driving the ball on Alabama. And to your point, if Alabama's not giving them shorter fields or giving up really big plays, I just don't know how LSU's going to be able to score enough to win. And so that's kind of where I am with LSU, and that's why I haven't completely bought in. Like I don't have a problem with them being ranked where they're ranked because of who they beat. Like, no one else in college football has as many quality wins as LSU does, so they deserve to be ranked up there. But do I feel from watching them like they're one of the 4 or 5 best teams in the country? I don't. And that, to me is where the home crowd obviously makes a big difference for them, especially in a night game. But it's going to take something more. And like you said, it's either going to be Alabama helping them by turning the ball over, which is something that, look, when your starting quarterback is not turning the ball over, then it's a lot less likely that the turnovers are going to come. And then the other thing is special teams, and while Alabama certainly has had its deficiencies in, the field goal and extra point kicking, they've certainly had their deficiencies in the punting. If anything, their deficiencies they've been in the actual punting itself, not the coverage. And so that's where, unless LSU can get a blocked kick or something like that, I don't know. Like, it's going to have to come from some area that we haven't really seen as a vulnerability of Alabama up to this point.
Brad, you're a guy that always loves to look at the numbers. When you look at Tua, is he on cruise control for this Heisman? I mean, let's pretend that he gets through the month of November, he wins the SEC championship. Long as he stays healthy, is this his to lose?
Look, I think that let's start with the fact that it's a quarterback award. And I don't think any running back, even if there were one having a huge season for a major team right now, I don't think any running back is going to win the Heisman unless the quarterbacks of the best teams are not exceptional that year. And that kind of eliminates the running backs from it. Then you look at the quarterbacks. Who's the competition? I think there's one guy right now, and that's Kyler Murray. Because Oklahoma has already lost a game, unless Alabama loses, I have a hard time seeing Murray being able to make up enough ground there. So I think that's the first part is Alabama not losing. And so I think if Alabama beats LSU and Tua plays well in the game, he could possibly build up such a big lead that even if he had a couple of lackluster performances toward the end, even if Alabama were upset in the SEC championship game, it might not be enough for Kyler Murray or anyone else to make up that gap. I mean, just 2 years ago, that's basically what happened with Lamar Jackson. And his team had a loss already. But his numbers were so far beyond what everyone else was doing, that even though he kind of stumbled down the stretch, he still had built up enough of a cushion that he was able to hold on. And so that's why I think, look, it's really the last thing on a lot of people's minds because of the significance of the game overall within the SEC West and the national championship race and all that stuff. But from a Heisman perspective, this is a huge game for the race, just because, like I said, if Alabama wins and Tua plays well, and you'd figure that he would if they're winning the game, I just don't see how anyone else is going to catch up. But I do think Kyler Murray's numbers are going to continue to be outstanding. It's just a question of how many people are going to vote for Murray with a loss if Tua is putting up very similar numbers and doesn't have a loss. And there are a couple other things, just real quick, that I think factor into this, which is that for some voters, not a ton, but enough to make a difference, it will matter to them that Baker Mayfield won last year and Kyler Murray's the quarterback of the same team, and they'll think, okay, if we're having this conversation 2 years in a row, then maybe it's a system thing. I don't think that's true. I think both of them are outstanding quarterbacks. But then the other thing that's going to, affect some voters is that Kyler Murray is about to leave to go play professional baseball. And there will be a few people out there who say, you know what, I'd rather a football player win the Heisman than a baseball player. So there are a lot of things kind of going into his favor right now. I think if he just has a really good game against LSU and they win, then he's in a great spot.
Brad, a final couple of questions here. Look ahead. 1 week from today, your college football playoff rankings are released. I want you to look beyond that and project everything in the way that you see it. Give me the 4 best teams in college football, and you could base scenarios, schedules, just see how the last 4 teams standing, in your opinion, that first week in November. December. I'm sorry.
Yeah, you know what? It's hard for me right now to envision Alabama or Clemson losing. And as much as I know, when you start to get into the odds for each game, combined probability and all that, it's still not like ridiculously low. You're probably talking 40-something% chance on paper for both to win out. It just feels a lot higher than that. So I would expect Alabama and Clemson both to be there, both be undefeated. And, as far as who's next, I give Notre Dame a good chance to be there, although something inside of me is telling me they'll lose one of these games. The way that Ohio State has played, not just last weekend, but even before that, they had shown plenty of signs of weaknesses. I think Michigan is going to come out of the Big Ten. And so I think Michigan will be there. And if it's not Notre Dame and Michigan, who would the fourth one be? My best guess would be Oklahoma. So I think I guess if I was asked to predict it right now, which you just asked me to do, I'm going to say it's Alabama, Clemson, Michigan, and then Oklahoma, which probably would put Alabama against Oklahoma in the semifinal, which would be an interesting matchup just because I think you'd have a team that would be more capable of scoring with Alabama than anyone else in college football. The question, of course, would be the Oklahoma defense.
Brad, final question. Florida, Georgia, your thoughts?
I still have a hard time. Look, I finally am where I can certainly imagine it happening, which is Georgia losing to Florida. I just have such a hard time believing Georgia's not going to win the SEC East. So I'm leaning Georgia, but they've got some questions. They got some things they got to figure out. And look, with the bye, to have a little bit of extra time to work on some things, I would expect that you're going to see more of Justin Fields than you've seen in any game so far this year. Does Kirby trust him enough to allow him to throw a good bit more? I don't know. All I know is that no one knows outside of the people who are at Georgia's practices every day how close he is to Fromm. But it would be a calculated risk to put him out there. Look, let's go back to the national championship game and the Alabama coaches, knowing what they knew about Tua from watching him in practice all the time, had the confidence to put him out there with the season on the line. Georgia's season is now on the line. They cannot afford another loss. So if they do go to Fields, I'm not saying to start, but if they just play him a lot more, that tells you that they've seen all the signs that he's ready. And I think they might need him because the way Georgia's played the last few weeks and the way that Florida has improved, this game feels more like a toss-up to me than I have then I'm able to really accept that it is because I just I look at the teams and I see Georgia being a lot better than Florida, but they're not playing a lot better than Florida, I guess is the way I would say it.
J. Brad Edwards, find him, ESPN College Football Insider, ESPN.com, analyst for College Game Day, part of ESPN Stats and Information Group, and always those wonderful tweets that enjoy some stats. Man, that was one that I was soaking in on Saturday looking at that and just kind of looking at it. Ohio State's last 4 losses have been all by more than 14 points. And did you see the reports where there's some friction growing between Urban Meyer and Ohio State? I don't know if you've noticed that.
No, I didn't. That doesn't surprise me. But my point of the tweet was not that Alabama is better than Ohio State. I think everybody understands that. The point is that an elite program should not be losing by large margins that frequently, and especially not back-to-back years against an unranked team. They've been beaten by 4 touchdowns by Iowa and Purdue in consecutive seasons. And when you have superior talent, that absolutely should not happen. And to me, it goes beyond Urban. Urban ultimately is responsible because he's not only the coach, but he hired all the assistants, he recruited all the players. But I don't think that a team can lose that big to an inferior opponent, especially not 2 years in a row, unless something's missing in the locker room as well. It just seems to me that they don't have enough alphas. I don't think they got enough people getting in the faces of their teammates and saying that certain things are unacceptable because I don't see enough fight in them. And that just really surprises me given the talent they have.
Brad, as always, thank you again for being a part of the show. Have a great week.
All right. Always, Ryan. Take care.